Okay, so welcome to this week's Spiral Dynamics Integral Live. This one is Moving Through the Spiral, Somatic Psychotherapy, Polyvagal Theory, and Embodied Communication with Ēlen Awalom. Ēlen Awalom is an embodied leadership trainer, conscious communication facilitator, and metamodern theorist based in Washington, D.C. Passionate about cultivating stillness and presence, Ēlen practices somatic meditation, breathwork, and hot yoga. Born to Eritrean revolutionaries in the mid-'80s, Ēlen's exploration of mysticism, developmental psychology, and somatic psychotherapy is deeply rooted in her innate curiosity, systems thinking, and a profound inclination to question reality. So welcome, Ēlen, and looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Josh. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you and resume the conversation that we began. I think it was in November. We were having someone else, I think, presented, or we were having, actually, it was just a dialogue. And somehow we got on the subject of somatic psychotherapy that I had experienced from a practitioner who I would consider to have a green center of gravity, and the pros and cons of that. And what it would look like to have someone who could support us in transcending and including the earlier stages while being at, while functioning and being centered at a post-green stage. So today I'm going to be presenting my talk, Moving Through the Spiral, Somatic Psychotherapy, Embodied Communication, and Polyvagal Theory. And my website, I actually stayed up all night working on this for you all. So lots of love. And my website is not, I have a new website that I've been working on, but I haven't launched the new one yet. But if you find this compelling and you're interested in learning more or working with me or just following along, then please, I invite you to go to my website, www.eelenawalom.com, and sign up for my email list. And I'm happy to add you to my email list so you can stay aware of everything that is transpiring. And my new business, I've been working on it for about 3 months, is called the Alma's Leadership Institute. And at the end of my talk, I want to focus on this piece, like giving the lecture first, but at the end of my talk, I will discuss a little bit of what I'm up to. And just a little note of warning, since I was up quite late working on this, I'm a little bit sleep deprived. Coffee is helping, but I'm slightly sleep deprived. And also the presentation is not fancy. It's more sort of helping me, guiding me along as I go through the talk. So if you find that there's just like a title and there's not like content in the slide, please don't be alarmed. This is not meant to be like a fancy slideshow. This is more guiding along the conversation, almost like note cards, if you will. So introduction. Who am I? So my name is Ēlen Awalom. I am a somatic experiencing practitioner. I'm a formally trained cultural anthropologist. Notably, I'm a former Black leftist. As I mentioned, my parents are from Eritrea, and I grew up in a household that was deeply leftist and deeply feminist. And my parents were a product of the 60s and 70s and all of the revolutions that occurred in what were then known as third world countries. And so there was a lot of progress made in disrupting all of the previous existing structures. And, people were throwing off the shackles of what they saw as oppressive structures, everything from religion to the patriarchy to, colonial, what they described as colonial thinking or European colonial thinking. So that played a really big role. And I think that's important to note because for me, spiral dynamics and integral theory, and then somatic psychotherapy and the communication strategies that come out of these lineages are what helped me shift out of this important, what I would consider Green's way of thinking, into a higher way of moving and moving through and navigating the world. I'm also, so as I was saying, I used to be a leftist in my 20s and some of my early 30s, trained by Malcolm X's contemporaries, people who helped give birth to and in my early 20s, we kind of laid the foundation for the contemporary BLM movement, which is Black Lives Matter movement. So a lot of those, the folks who emerged as the leaders over the last decade were people that I became acquainted with. And in fact, in my 30s, I co-founded a startup with Patrisse Cullors, who's the founder of one of the founders of Black Lives Matter. So that's very relevant because sometimes, depending on our identity or depending on people's defenses getting triggered, they can rush to assume that when we critique post-colonial, what I consider post-colonial or green psychology, that we're coming from a space of like being orange or being at an earlier stage, and that we're someone who hasn't deeply gone through these stages and is kind of bypassing them, whether intellectually or somatically. And that's not the case for me. I was also an exhibiting artist. Anyway, I was an exhibiting artist, and in my 20s, I studied bodywork, energy medicine, and then I also am an integrally trained communication facilitator. So there's various communication modalities that I'll talk about later on that came out of integral, spiral dynamics, and the diamond approach, in which I'm trained, and again, which have played a really significant role in helping me realize that fundamentally, my perspective, that part of what is preventing us from shifting out of the difficult circumstances that we find ourselves in is that the majority of the time, people are not listening to one another, and they're responding to what they think you're saying, what they assume you're saying, and that's just the majority of human communication, is people constantly missing one another. And then responding and reacting to those projections and utter chaos. So my belief is that really learning how to slow down and listen deeply and communicate from that space can play a really major role in helping. Particularly, I'm very concerned about those of us in the United States, because there's intense polarization, politically speaking. And I live in Washington, D.C. I've just started reaching out to folks who work on Capitol Hill, and also starting to think about how I want to convey these ideas in a way that lands for those folks. Because, like I said, I think a big part of what is leading to the polarization is that people are just very defensive and defended. And so they're not able to listen to one another's perspectives. And they usually are assuming that people are not acting in good faith. So first, I'd actually like to start us off with several minutes of VU breathing. So VU breathing is something that Peter Levine, the founder of Somatic Experiencing, learned from Tibetan Buddhist practitioners. And so for people who are not familiar, just so you get a sense of how beneficial these practices can be, I'd like to guide us through a little bit of the breathwork practice. And really quickly, you can see I have a little bit about the science behind VU breathing. But basically, particularly for trauma survivors, which I believe is the majority of people on the planet right now, we can frequently feel, especially post-COVID, we can frequently feel on edge or in a constant state of sympathetic hyperarousal, expecting something bad to happen. So breathing can give our brain and body a much needed break. Peter Levine was gracious enough to think of a way to stimulate our rest and digest or parasympathetic nervous system. And he shares about the PNS being stimulated by activating the vagal nerve in his book In an Unspoken Voice, that deals with trauma being stuck in the body. Stimulating the vagus nerve is another amazing way to induce feelings of calm and really activate the PNS. So now we're going to talk about how to mix breathing with stimulation of the vagus nerve step by step. So first, I want to be really clear that participation in this practice is not mandatory. If you decide that you would rather do something else with your time, if you decide that at any point during the practice that it doesn't feel good for your body, you are the authority on yourself and you can stop at any time. So none of this practice is required. Again, it's really, really important for me to emphasize because everyone's body is different. And what is really effective, a really effective tool for one person could be highly ineffective for another. So I ask for you to please turn off your screens and mute yourself if you're not already muted. And to get seated and find a place to sit where you can rest. Please turn off your screens. Great. Find a place to sit where you can rest. Place your feet on the floor and rest comfortably in your chair. Close your eyes if you feel safe, or if you choose to keep your eyes open, keep a low fixed gaze. Again, if you'd rather stand or lay down, that's also okay. But really, really feel your feet on the floor. Now I want to invite you to notice your breath and really begin to settle into it. Just noticing each breath cycle as it comes in and out. Just notice and don't change anything. Now, when you're ready, I invite you to begin to allow yourself to take a deep, slow breath in through your nose and fill your belly with air. Be sure you are truly breathing into your belly and not your chest. You will know you are belly breathing if you breathe in and your shoulders don't keep moving up and down while you breathe. So I'm gonna demo this. And if you'd like, you can listen to me first to get a sense of how it works, or you can breathe along with me. So I'm gonna take a deep breath in through my nose and filling my belly with air. Woo. Now allow the sound to vibrate and resonate in your chest, arms, and even your legs. Feel and enjoy the deep vibrations that the VU sound provides. Again, inhaling. VU. Making sure that your shoulders don't move up as you inhale. Filling your belly with air. VU. VU. And I'm going to mute myself and we're going to go for another 3 minutes. Okay, excellent. So for people who are ready, I will invite you to bring your focus back to the room. When you're ready, I invite you to bring your focus back to the room, beginning to bring awareness to your body, maybe twisting your wrists or ankles. And whenever you feel ready, just open your eyes and return to the room. Okay. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about Stephen Porges and his polyvagal theory. Dr. Stephen Porges is the originator of polyvagal theory, and he identified a biological order of human response that is active in human experience. So we come into this world wired to connect. With our first breath, we embark on a quest to feel safe in our bodies, in our environments, and in our relationships with others. The autonomic nervous system is our personal surveillance system, always on guard, asking the question, is this safe? Its goal is to protect us by sensing safety and risk, listening moment by moment to what is happening in and around our bodies and in the connections we have to others. This listening happens far below awareness and far away from our conscious control. Dr. Porges, understanding that this is not awareness that comes with perception, coined the term neuroception to describe the way that our autonomic nervous system scans for cues of safety, danger, and life threat without involving the thinking parts of our brain. Because we humans are meaning-making beings, what begins as the wordless experiencing of neuroception drives the creation of a story that shapes our daily living. So now we're going to talk about the different branches of the nervous system, beginning with the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is made up of two main branches, and that's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, which we just spent some time working on. The Wu breathing practice stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is made up of two main branches, the sympathetic and parasympathetic, and it responds to signals and sensations via three pathways, each with a characteristic pattern of response. Through each of these pathways, we react in service of survival. The sympathetic branch is found in the middle part of the spinal cord and represents the pathway that prepares us for action. It responds to cues of danger and triggers the release of adrenaline, which fuels the fight or flight response. In the parasympathetic branch, the remaining two pathways are found in a nerve called the vagus. Vagus, meaning wanderer, is aptly named. From the brainstem at the base of the skull, the vagus travels in two directions, downward through the lungs, heart, and diaphragm and stomach, and upwards to connect with the nerves in the neck, throat, eyes, and ears. Now, the vagus is divided into two parts, the ventral vagal pathway and the dorsal vagal pathway. The ventral vagal pathway responds to cues of safety and supports feelings of being safely engaged and socially connected. So this is very important because we're going to talk about how this applies both to our own growth as humans from a spiral dynamics perspective, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about the current, I don't know, I try not to use the word crisis because I don't want to give that energy, but we're in a time between worlds, and especially so around the globe in the Middle East, but especially in the US, right? This is an election year. There's a lot at stake. And so in contrast, the dorsal vagal pathway responds to cues of extreme danger. It takes us out of connection, out of awareness, and in a protective state of collapse. When we feel frozen, numb, or not here, the dorsal vagus has taken control. So that's also really, really important. So basically, the ventral vagal pathway responds to cues of safety and supports feelings of being safely engaged and socially connected. In contrast, the dorsal vagal pathway responds to cues of extreme danger. It takes us out of connection, out of awareness, and into a protective state of collapse. When we feel frozen, numb, or not here, the dorsal vagus has taken control. So I want to be mindful because there's a lot that I have to get through in this dialogue. That's a little bit of the fundamentals of the autonomic nervous system. And well, I'll leave it. I'll just summarize it by saying the dorsal vagal system runs the basic utilities of the home or the brain or the body. The system works continually in the background, keeping our basic body systems online and in order. When there is a glitch in the system, we pay attention. When all is running smoothly, the body's functions work automatically. Without the influence of the ventral vagal system, the basic utilities run the empty house, but no one is home. Or if we are home, the environment is one that brings no comfort. Everything is turned down to the lowest possible setting, enough to keep the air circulating and the pipes from freezing. The environment is just habitable enough to sustain life. The sympathetic branch can be thought of as the home security system, maintaining a range of responses and armed to react to any emergencies. This alarm system is designed to trigger an immediate response and then return to standby. Without the influence of the ventral vagal system, the alarm system receives a steady stream of emergency notifications and continues to sound the alarm. The ventral vagal system allows us to soak in and savor this home we are inhabiting. We can enjoy it as a place to rest and renew by ourselves and as a place to join with friends and family. We feel the basic utilities running in the background. The rhythms of our heart and breath are regulated. We trust that the monitoring system is on standby. The integration of systems allows us to be compassionate towards others, curious about the world we live in, and emotionally and physically connected to others. Would anyone actually, I'll wait till the end because there may be questions and commentary, but that last piece is really, really important. Because for me, it hints at the fact that whether it's people in politics, whether it's people like politicians or activists or even lay people who are thinking about the situation and I would say we're in an economic crisis in the United States. Like inflation is through the roof. Everything is very difficult for a substantial amount of the population. And so, of course, these circumstances can drive us into a lower state of functioning, right? So we get into that freeze state where we are constantly vigilant, looking for signs of rejection or abandonment or perceiving criticism and hostility where there is none, right? So we're hyper aware of any potential threats or perceived threats in the environment. And when we are in our ventral vagal system, and that's important, right? So that's the dorsal vagal system. And in the sympathetic branch, that is where we have like I said, the alarm system, which receives a steady stream of emergency notifications. But when we are triggered, then that thing is the alarm is constantly going off for every little thing, right? But when we're in ventral vagal, then we have the capacity to be connected to ourselves, can be compassionate towards other people, curious about the world that we inhabit, and we also feel a sense of emotional and physical connection to others. So we're much less likely to perceive threat where there is none, and we're much less likely to engage in behavior that harms us or harms other people. So I'm going to talk just briefly about somatic psychotherapy. So embodiment practices have been around for thousands of years in most human traditions, whether they're indigenous European, indigenous Native American, indigenous African, Asian. People had ways of regulating their nervous systems as they move through life. And further, there were initiatory rituals to support us in moving through stages of life. We weren't just kind of winging it and trying to figure things out on our own the way that we, especially those of us who live in the West and particularly in the United States, have come to do, right? And about 70 years ago, 67, well, it's been a little bit longer than that. So the grandfather and father of somatic psychology over the last century, that would be William Reich, and then Alexander Lowen, a European psychoanalyst. They began formulating theories that both added on to the theories of Freud, and then also departed in some ways after engaging in experiments with their patients, as well as going and studying ancient traditions, particularly Asian and indigenous Native American traditions. And they came up with a body of work that we now understand as the foundations of somatic psychology and somatic psychotherapy. Lowen in particular was heavily penalized for this. He was imprisoned, he had to flee Europe. I believe he was of Jewish ancestry, so he had to flee Nazi Germany. And then he came to the US and he faced even more persecution. And his books were burned, most of his work and research was burned. He was considered a pariah, a sexual deviant. I mean, he's actually considered the father of the sexual revolution, Alexander Lowen, because he coined I believe he coined the term sexual liberation, because he believed that a big part of what's going on with us is that we carry lots of shame and anxiety and fear, regardless of our gender, in our pelvic area. Like there's a lot of stored energy there, and that by releasing that, we would usher in an era of human liberation. So especially for those days, this was like in the 50s and 60s, before the 70s. That was still very, very radical. So that was Alexander Lowen. And so those were the fathers of the field of somatic psychology. And then later on in the 1970s, various scientists and psychotherapists and physical therapists, people like Peter Levine and many others, I'm not going to go into all the different modalities, began to return to that work, because they were like, wow, we're all doing all this heavy work with psychedelics. We're like, not Peter Levine himself, but he saw many of his peers exploring meditation, exploring all these free love gatherings and just doing all kinds of hippie stuff, basically. But he noticed that they were still having a lot of difficulties navigating life. And so they began exploring the work of Reich and Lowen, and they also did their own work with various indigenous groups and learning from them. Levine in particular worked heavily with Tibetan Buddhist practitioners. And so I'm trained in somatic experiencing, so I know the most about that. But again, there were other modalities that emerged, like EMDR, which is eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. There was Hakomi, which is also a really beautiful somatic technology. And then more recently, over the last few decades, there's another modality that I really love, which is NARM, which is neuroaffective relational model. And in some ways, I consider it to be absolutely at the forefront of the revolution happening in the field of trauma psychology, because from a NARM perspective, they move away from sort of the earlier pathologizing language that was prominent in somatic psychology. So as I mentioned, both Reich and Lowen were part of the Freudian lineage. So, they still used, like personality disorder language to describe people's behavior, and they often pathologized it. And in the case of NARM, they talk about people's different ways of adapting as survival strategies, right? So now that doesn't mean that we're not mindful of when people's survival strategies are harmful to themselves or to others, but we view it from a very different and much more compassionate lens. And we're much less concerned about labeling the behavior and much more interested in getting curious about the nervous system of the person in front of us and helping them and asking them to guide us into an awareness of what is happening for them instead of making up a story. And that making up a story part is relevant, again, both to polyvagal theory and also to the embodied communication modalities that I'm going to talk about later. But when we are in dorsal vagal, then we usually feel a sense of safety and connection, and we're able to, ventral vagal. When we're in ventral vagal, we feel a sense of curiosity. And so the practitioner, part of the NARM practitioner training is a really major part of it is that we don't know anything. The client is the authority, and we just slow down and get curious about what their body wants to share and what their body's wisdom is wanting to unravel and reveal. So that is important. I want to emphasize that I'm not yet trained in NARM, although it is a priority for me. So this is not even like, it's not a business pitch. I'm just really excited about the possibilities that are emerging from the world of NARM. And I'm familiar with the faculty as well as the creator of the modality, and I've had a lot of positive interactions with them. So somatic experiencing, NARM, EMDR, Hakomi, those are a few of the somatic psychotherapeutic modalities that are very popular at the moment. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about somatic psychotherapy and embodiment along the spiral. So I'm going to share a personal anecdote. And I share this if anyone's interested in my conversation that I had with Layman Pascal on the Integral stage. We recorded it in mid-December, and it was uploaded about a month ago. So if you go to the Integral stage YouTube, you'll find the conversation. But about 6 years ago now, or 5.5 years ago, I unexpectedly went to a retreat at Ēlen. And while I was there, I met incredible somatic psychotherapists and a bunch of people who were talking about this stuff called spiral dynamics and integral theory. And integral I had heard of. I think, even when I was in my early 20s studying anthropology. But I hadn't really thought much of it. And so that really piqued my interest. And I went really deep into studying and understanding them. And both models just like blew my mind, completely changed the way that I related to myself and related to the world in a beautiful and positive way. And also, it also blew things up, right? Because it can be a little disorienting. About 10 months later, after having worked with the models and having done a lot of plant medicine and other really deep developmental work, I've sought a somatic psychotherapist, a Buddhist feminist somatic psychotherapist. And that was when it started to become aware. I started to become aware of the fact that that you can be a somatic psychotherapist. You can even be a non-dual spiritualist. You can even have maybe some similar political beliefs. But if your center of gravity is different than mine, then there were a lot of conflicts in our work together. So I would say something like, oh, such and such happened in my relationship. And then she would immediately reply with, oh, men are trash. I work with so many women. And, oh, the men are just so awful. And my God, they make the world so difficult. And, she would talk about Donald Trump, and she would like berate him and how he was such an awful and horrible man, and his poor wife, Ivanka, and how she was the victim. And whenever I would try to push back on her and be like, well, don't you think that she's getting things out of the interaction too? Like, whenever I would try to have any of those kinds of conversations with her, we would really hit a stopping point, right? And so my nervous system, I couldn't feel safe in that container. Now imagine I'm a woman and I'm a woman of color. So imagine if I were a man, right? Or imagine if I were a person of European ancestry, and this was a woman, she was French American. So that could be very activating to have a psychotherapist who basically thinks that you're the bad guy because of your gender and your ethnicity and whatever other attributes that you have, right? So I remember we worked together for quite some time, maybe about 6 or 7 months. And I coupled that with really deep plant medicine work. So I also, again, people have different opinions about it, but for me, that really changed that year. That year and a half there was such incredible transformation for me. And it was just, anyway, it was very important. But what I learned is that if if we have a practitioner who is, say, who is not like at a post-green stage of development, and we want to grow beyond that, then it can be difficult, right? Because our nervous system can't even relax, because usually their own biases or their own ways of viewing the world based on their center of gravity influences how they show up in therapy, in the therapeutic container. And then I will also add that for me, it helped me realize, oh my God, I've spent decades of my life primarily at stage green, and I'm not there anymore. Like all this different work that I've been doing over I began doing therapy and somatic psychotherapy at age 30. For the record, I'm 40 now. So it's been about probably 7 or 8 years of this work in total. And I was like, I'm not there anymore. And in part that was because of all the really deep cognitive behavioral and somatic psychotherapeutic work that I had done. And then the final piece for me, and I'm going to go on to the next piece, is that about 6 years ago, I found, and I'm going to wrap things up shortly. I started around the time that I went to Ēlen. I started doing embodied communication training. So that's authentic relating, circling, alethea, nonviolent communication, focusing, T group. Again, things that come out of the diamond approach and integral and spiral dynamics communities. And adjacent liminal web communities. I know the circling creator, for instance, has been working very closely with John Vervaeke for a number of years. And I think they're hosting something at some point this month or next month. DL Logos, I think, is the name of the series. So that when I started doing that work, that's when my whole world opened up, because I was like, the very first time I did it, I will never forget, because I was like, my God, all of my life, I have been walking around creating stories about what's true in the world, what's true for other people, and reacting based on those narratives. And that goes back to the piece about polyvagal theory, right? When we're not in that space, when we're not in ventral vagal, we're not in that space of curiosity and openness. And sometimes we think we know, right? Because our nervous system is moving really quickly to protect us. We're dysregulated. So we think we know, when actually there's very little that we know. And when we're more regulated and when we're more at ease, oftentimes we're more able to get curious about what's actually unfolding in the current moment. I'm going to talk a little bit about my offerings and then my website, and then I'm going to open up to questions and commentary. And yeah, so there's a lot that I'm actually, the offerings piece, I think I'll also pause that. If you are interested in learning more or potentially working with me, or you just want to stay connected, you can sign up for my email list at www.ēlenawalom.com. As I mentioned earlier, I'm hoping to launch my new website. I was trying to get it up before our lecture today, but I'm hoping to have it up Monday. And otherwise, you can also email me at ēlenawalom.com. I do group work. I also, work with people, like businesses and startups. And as I mentioned, I'm starting to venture out into Capitol Hill. So I don't want to make this too much of a pitch, and I'll leave it at that. But if you're curious, then please feel free to sign up or reach out to me. And I feel like I'm a slightly rushed, but I just want to be mindful of our time and the container. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope this was helpful. I wish I had more time because there's like so much more that I would have loved to like delve into and explain. But I think that probably would have been at least a 3 hour lecture. I realized that last night. I was like, wait, I only have an hour. Like I can't like teach all the things in an hour. So, or perhaps there'll be a part two to this lecture. So thank you again for joining us today. My name is Ēlen Awalom and I am complete.